This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 44 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and I ask the questions that may pop into my head. We are both here because we believe that the more you know in advance, the better prepared you will be to make difficult decisions before an unexpected crisis occurs.
So please relax and get yourself something delightful to snack and sip with, and thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me as we talk about how to help a child who's grieving. In the first half, we have our recipe of the week and a story of the World War II candy bomber. In the second half, I'm offering 15 ways to help a child that's grieving. And in our third half, we welcome back Claire Lucky, known on Instagram as the Grieving Bitch. At age 33, her husband of 2 years died, and she joins us to talk about her experiences as a millennial widow. So, Charlie, what's new?
Well, let's see here. Nothing. What's new with you?
Oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to go with nothing too. Nothing, honey.
What was that joke about? There was a commercial. Remember? Nut and honey
cereal.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, good. So for those of you who know what we're talking about, it's a nice chuckle. The others may be thinking, why do I tune into this? Okay, so I'll tell you a good reason why you tune into this. The recipes. So our recipe this week is for candy bar brownie bombs. Brownies wrapped around chocolate bars and dunked in chocolate. It's the bomb.
Doesn't that just sound great?
Yes. And speaking about candy bombs, let me tell you about the Candy Man. And I don't mean Sammy Davis Jr.
Who can make the sun rise?
That was Mr. Davis's biggest hit, and he hated that song.
I actually hated that song too. He is so talented.
Really? Yeah.
And how insulting that was his greatest hit.
And once in a while, I see clips of him. What an absolutely amazing dancer.
Oh, God, yeah.
Jeez, just...
Oh, yeah. Did you ever see him in Sweet Charity?
Yes. Yes.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, I just see clips of different variety shows, like from the 50s and 60s, and I'm just speechless.
The stuff
Jeez.
He put up with from the Rat Pack.
Yeah.
Oh. So again, if you know what we're talking about, great.
If not, look it up. But yeah, really, you want to see a spectacular entertainer? Yeah, look, just Google him. Sammy Davis, dancing or something like that. Just a phenomenal dancer, and of course, just a spectacular voice as well. And with that, going back, yes. So, Colonel Gail Halvorson.
It doesn't take much, Charlie. It doesn't take much to get you off track.
It's Sammy. So, for the business at hand, Colonel Gail Halvorson became famous for his humanitarian actions during the Berlin blockade, a tense standoff between the West and the Soviet Union. That sounds familiar. That marked the beginning of the Cold War. The new Air Force suddenly needed C-54 pilots for the West Germany Berlin airlift in July of 1948, and Halvorson volunteered to go. He was at Tempelhof, Germany, talking to some children about airplanes, and as he walked away, he realized the kids had not asked for anything. He thought about his past experiences. Crowds of kids always laughed and begged for a handout or a treat. He felt in his pocket, and all he had were 2 sticks of Wrigley's Doublemint gum. That was what Halvorson would later call his moment of truth, the continental divide of his long life. Halvorson turned back toward the fence. He didn't know if the children would fight over his small offering, but he broke the gum into bits and handed them out throughout the fence. The children carefully tore the gum and foil into even smaller pieces, enough for all. Just then, another C-54 roared overhead. That suddenly gave Halverson an idea. On the spur of the moment, he promised that he'd drop them more candy when he flew over. They know it was him because he'd wiggle his wings, he said. The colonel was good to his word. The next day, he and 2 crew members bought their full allowance of sweets at the Rhine-Main base exchange. Halverson tied up handkerchiefs for parachutes to slow the candy's descent. The pilot wiggled the C-54's wings and passed over the apartment building. Navigator Elkin stuffed the goods out the emergency flare chute in front of the left wing. It worked. As they taxied in, they could see the children celebrating. Over the next several weeks, the air crew pooled resources and dropped as much candy as they could. But they knew they were breaking many, many regulations with their behavior and were likely to get shipped back home if caught. Halverson's commander summoned him. The colonel slapped a copy of the Frankfurter Zeitung on the table. "You almost hit a reporter in the head with a candy bar in Berlin yesterday," he said. "He spread the story all over Europe. The general called me with congratulations, and I didn't know anything about it. Why didn't you tell me?" The U.S. had quickly recognized the publicity value of what came to be called Operation Little Vittles. Commanders charged Halverson with organizing a larger airdrop. Eventually, dozens of pilots were involved. Halverson made a tour stateside, where he appeared on radio and TV to promote the project to the American people. Candy manufacturers donated their wares by the boxcar load. Residents of Chicopee, Massachusetts, location of Westover Air Force Base, home station for many of the aircraft dispatched to the Berlin lift, organized to tie up parachutes. The town's children did much of the work on weekends and after school. Colonel Halverson retired in 1974 with over 8,000 hours of flying time. Among other honors, he was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 2014. He died on February 16, 2022, at age 101. Rest in peace, Colonel Halverson. Thank you for your service to our country and your humanity toward children in their time of need.
That's a great story.
Please go to our webpage for the recipe for candy bar brownie bombs and additional resources for this program. We hope you will follow us on Facebook and Instagram and any other social media we are on, which I seldom use, and remember to rate and review this podcast. We have a link in our show notes that makes rating our podcast so easy, even I can figure it out. That would be so helpful to us and to you. As a licensed nonprofit organization, we are dependent on your kindness and always appreciate your tax-deductible donations. Many of you find this podcast to be of help. You've told us. So please go to our webpage to donate so that we can continue to provide quality shows about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement, and the occasional cocktail recipe. Check our webpage at www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number 1, dies.org. Marianne?
Thanks, Charlie. Paul Simon wrote about 50 ways to leave your lover. So I'm here today to tell you about 15 ways you can help your child or anybody's child that you care about in your life with their grief. And right up front, I want to offer apologies to Paul Simon. So just take care of yourself, Elf. Exercise, eat well-balanced meals, stick to a regular routine, and reach out to others for support. Now, these activities might be difficult when you're grieving, but taking care of yourself is still important. Grieving children do better when they have a healthy adult providing support and understanding to them. Share all you can, Stan. Tell your child stories about your own life, times that you were afraid, sad, or angry. Tell them how you dealt with these situations and what you learned. Children love to hear stories about the adults in their lives, and when those adults were children. Sharing stories helps a child normalize what they are experiencing. Honesty is the key, Lee. Discuss the death with your child in a simple, direct, and age-appropriate manner. Be honest and share clear, accurate information about what happened. Children need to hear the truth from someone they love. Listen to them talk, walk. Listen to your child share his or her story about what happened. Let them ask you questions and answer their questions as best you can. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. What's most helpful is to listen without judging, interpreting, or evaluating. Number 5 is to acknowledge their grief, Steve. Recognize that your child is grieving. Be careful not to impose your grief on your child, but allow him or her to grieve in their own way. It's normal for children to feel an array of emotions, including sadness, anger, frustration, and fear. It's also normal for children to move in and out of grief reactions, at times being very upset or getting angry easily, and at times playing as if nothing has happened. If you're not sure how grief is impacting your child, spend time with them, playing, coloring, drawing, or sharing stories. Quite often, children will give you clues to their grief through these activities. Number 6, tell them the truth, Ruth. Truth is the foundation of a trusting relationship between a caregiver, parent, grandparent, and child. Lying to children about circumstances of death can lead to bitterness and mistrust when children learn the truth. And trust me, they will learn the truth. Maybe not right away, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will. And I got lost. Let the child's questions guide what you share. Speak openly and honestly about the death. And remember, again, it's okay to not know all the answers. Number 7, be creative, David. Give your child a creative outlet to express feelings. This could be done through drawing, writing, doing crafts, listening to music, or playing games. Number 8, this isn't one and done, son. Accept that this is an ongoing conversation. Younger children might need to be told many times, and they might ask repeatedly how the person died or to hear that story. And it might be painful for you to tell that story, but that's part of how they grieve, and we're the adults, and so we need to be able to talk about it with them. Number 9, take time to plan, and take some deep breaths and give yourself time to collect your thoughts. Think of your initial conversation as laying the groundwork, allowing the child to ask questions and find out what the child's thinking. Focus on ensuring they understand that what was said and explain that the death is no one's fault. Number 10, maintain clear expectations, Jason. Keep rules and boundaries consistent. Children gain security when they know that what is going to be expected of them. Children will often use their pain as an excuse for inappropriate behavior. While you should always acknowledge the grief your child is experiencing, you should also teach them to be accountable for their choices, no matter how they feel. Number 11, create new family traditions and rituals, Jules. Rituals can give your family tangible ways to acknowledge your grief and honor the memory of those who've died. Lighting candles, recognizing special occasions, sharing stories about those who have died, or volunteering with a local charity as a family are some of the ways that you can incorporate new traditions or rituals. Number 12, grief is individual, Sybil. Children usually don't tell you that they're grieving by what they say or do. No two children grieve the exact same way. Be patient, not complacent. You and your child are grieving, and the most intense parts of grief often take longer than we really would ever want them to. Grief also changes us in many ways. So be patient as you and your child experience your grief. Be patient with your child with repetition. A child often comes back with wanting to hear the same details and questions. Patiently spend time with your child as they and you grow, change, and continue to construct your story. Number 13, use clear, age-appropriate language that keeps it simple, Dimple. The caregiver or the parent should explain the death in a compassionate manner using age-appropriate, short, simple explanations. It's important to use the right words to talk about the death, like mom died from cancer. Avoid code words such as passed away, went to sleep, because those are confusing to kids. The key is that children do not associate the death with anything other than the reality of what occurred. Number 14, reassure. Remind your child that they're loved and that you're there for them. Following the death of a person in his or her life, a child's sense of safety can be shaken. Children often fear that you or other people in their life might die. While you can't promise that you or others will not die, because that wouldn't be true, you can let your child know that you're taking care of your health so that you can be with them for as long as possible. Number 15, grief is enduring. Grief is not an experience that children get over or move on from after a few weeks or months. Grief does not have a timeline, and it changes over the course of someone's life. It's expected for children to continue to grieve the loss as they grow and develop. So in conclusion, the most important thing you can do for your child is to be present, kind, and compassionate. You do need to discuss much. Just listen to me. Charlie?
Marianne, that was spectacular. I almost want to say the word sweet and to the point. Very.
But that wouldn't be me.
You're right, it wouldn't be you. But it's, wow. Thank you. It's, very clear and yeah, thank you. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
Claire Lucky, who...
So what do we got for our third half? Oh, sorry.
What?
So what do we have for our third half, Charlie?
Claire Lucky. Claire, as more and more people are discovering, who goes under the name... Claire Lucky, who goes under the name Grieving Bitch on Instagram, is part of the Everyone Dies correspondent team. At age 32 and only 5 months into her marriage, her husband Matt did not recognize her when she arrived home from work one day. He was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma, brain cancer, in February 2020, and Claire was his caregiver until his death in June of 2021. To begin to cope with this loss and trauma, she channeled her sense of humor and inner bitch by creating the Grieving Bitch. Claire is sharing her grief journey and life challenges as a 34-year-old widow living in New York City with Everyone Dies in her regular bi-monthly third half segment.
Hi, this is Marianne Matsko from Everyone Dies, and we're going to be talking with Claire Lucky today, who on Instagram is known as the Grieving Bitch. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Marianne. Hi, everyone. Grieving Bitch, checking in.
You're so sweet. It's hard to think of you as a bitch.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think some other people might have different opinions, but I'm glad that I project nice.
You do. You project nice. You play nice. So, last we left off, I feel like I'm in one of those old-fashioned serial stories, or daily dramas. But last time we talked was right when the story about Matt dying, and I know a lot went with that. And one of the things that you told me before was that you really felt like you needed to get back to work, and you went back to work pretty quickly, right?
I did. I went back 3 weeks after Matt passed, and even my coworkers were surprised it was that fast. So, but I really leaned on it.
So, what kind of, just in general, what kind of work do you do that, so we get a sense of what kind of job you went back to?
I work in financial services and I do a lot of regulatory reporting and project management. So it's incredibly boring and incredibly dry. And that was very helpful for me because I went from dealing with life and death situations to basically a piece of paper. So in a way, it was a little bit therapeutic to do something that, you know, at the end of the day, if I messed something up, if someone's life or, you know, well-being wasn't at risk. So I took the 3 weeks off, you know, between his passing, and I saw some family, I saw some friends, and I just got to the point where I was like, I have to do something. Like I was just sitting in my apartment the whole time, or well, for a couple of days. And I was like, I got to get out of the house. I have to see people again, because this is also on the heels of COVID. So I had been very isolated during Matt's illness, and I wanted a normal life. And for me, that meant going back to corporate America. And there were two things that have anchored me in my life. One of those things was Matt, and the other thing was my career. I had been working to where I got in financial services for about 10 years, and I got this job, and I was making the same amount of money as Matt. And Matt was 5 years older, and he was in the same industry as me. So it was a huge sense of pride that I had this job.
Wow.
Yeah. And they had worked with me the whole time when Matt was sick. So it was a victory to return.
So they didn't put any pressure on you to go back, and they were supportive while you were off Matt then. Well, and it was also COVID, so probably it was a little easier for them to be flexible. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely true. And I think that, I was fortunate enough that I had been working in this team when I was engaged to Matt. So they saw me happy, engaged. They saw me get married. They saw everything. And then they saw, you know, him have the seizures, and they really stepped with me through everything. So I think they did a really good job of, you know, there's policies and this and that, but they just said, take the time you need. We'll figure out all the HR stuff, like as we go. So, during Matt's illness, I worked, I think for 6 months of it. And then, they let me work 2 days a week for some time just because I needed an outlet. So we had a really great relationship. And when I was ready to come back, I was ready to come back. And they were like, work from home, work from here, do a few days, do a couple of days. And what I found was helpful for me was I went into the office, and this was July of 2021, and I was there 5 days a week. And I was with my boss, and I was with another person on my team, and then other people were on the floor. Not everybody was back yet, but it was just good for me to be social. And I was so painfully socially awkward. It was, I wish we had recorded some of that, because I barely knew how to talk to people about anything other than stage 4 brain cancer or death. And I was lucky that not the full staff was at work, and it was just like this group of people that we all had a reason to be at work. Like, I was grieving, so I was like, I need to get out of the house. And everybody had their own like little story. So it was like this group of 20 of us that were on the floor, and on Thursdays or Fridays, we would go out and have a drink and chat. And that kind of rehabilitated me to be in the world again.
You know, though, I think too that, I mean, I know, you know, my 2 years in COVID, you know, we just isolated out by the lake, you know, in Oklahoma. And when it came time to kind of reintroduce to people, I felt like a fan. You know, like I really forgot, like, how to talk to people. I forgot, you know, like my kids would be over and I'd start doing something. Then I would just like walk away and do something else. And they're like, where'd you go? It's like, oh yeah, there's other people here. So I think that the people who actually isolated during COVID, and I had other friends too who they could talk to other people for like 5 or 10 minutes, and then it's like, oh, you need to go away because I've had enough. It's like
yeah, totally. It's like 1 5-minute conversation, and it's like, I gotta sit down. That's it. Like, that's it. I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know. I mean, like, I remember being in the elevator and like my first week back, and not knowing and not knowing the person in the elevator with me, and not knowing if I should say hello or look them in the eye. And I was like, God, I just want this elevator to drop. I just hate this so much.
Yeah, a lot of really kind of weird things went on with, not being around people during COVID. But then on top of that for you is this incredibly emotional experience of being with the person you love through chemo and surgery and seizures and not being able to move. I mean, things you do. So that it.
Yeah, so it was different.
This is all I know. Right?
Yeah, it was all I knew. And the other thing I felt was everybody at work knew what happened. So I felt like I was going back to work, and I felt naked. I felt like everyone knew that, like, the worst situation happened to this 34-year-old. Like, I felt like there were all these eyes and attention on me, and I didn't know how to deal with it other than talking to people about it. And people I would just have conversations about death, like, with my boss, just so casually on like a Tuesday at 10. And she was, in retrospect, she was like really good about the whole thing. And I ended up giving her a bottle of Matt's bourbon. She hasn't opened it yet, but we're trying to figure out when she wants to open it. But I can't. I also went back to work strategically because I was like, I can't go back to a full staff and be this weird. Like, I know I'm going to be weird because I'm a widow, but I need to at least practice with a smaller group of people. And it does come. I want to give some words of hope that I feel like I can carry a conversation with a stranger without talking about death, dying, or terminal illness. And that's we're like about a year out, and it finally happened. So it does happen.
So how long did it take before you could get through? Because I've seen some of your memes where was it recently one of your memes was like, I'm not going to talk about death. What was that one?
Yeah. I've only recently been able to bring up or not bring up that I'm a widow in conversation. But before that, I couldn't even say the words late husband. So I didn't even, like, probably for the first 6 months or 8 months, I couldn't even say my husband was dead to anybody that didn't know. So work was kind of safe because people knew the situation. But it's this weird, I think it comes up as like shame for me, but I think it's because people have pity and sorrow for me. It's just it wasn't a pleasant emotional experience to talk about, him being dead, even though I've been dealing with it for 2 years, but it just feels like stigmatizing.
So is it shame? I'm just interested in that characterization. Is it shame? Usually shame is associated with having done something wrong, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think I felt like, how could this have happened? It still felt like I was doing all these things that were good. I think I was reconciling with, how could something this bad happen when nothing that mattered I did equated to something like him getting stage 4 brain cancer and dying. And I didn't, I was reconciling with, this is who I am. This is a part of me. My husband died, and I didn't necessarily feel comfortable sharing that with people in the beginning. And then it became like I was like almost a 5-year-old telling everybody that my husband was dead, and like I'm wanting to yell from the rooftops, "You're going to die. We're all going to die." And now I'm circling back to temper. So it was like silence, and then it was a megaphone, and now it's kind of like, here and there, I sprinkle it in. Like seasoning, like salt. Like there was no salt in the beginning. I over salted, and now it's just, I'm trying to season appropriately.
Okay. And that's a year. So I think for our listeners, when they say, when will this get better? When will this get easier? When will I be able to season my food appropriately? It's like, well, it's the time frame can be different for everybody, right? But for you, it took about a year to be able to find that balance. And there's going to be times when you're going to oversalt, right? Even now.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's different for everybody, and I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Like I could swing back and want to tell everybody from the rooftops again, or I could swing and not want to talk about it, and it's just going to ebb and flow. It could have to do with a milestone. Like I know at work, my 1 year it was like my second wedding anniversary. Didn't have with Matt, and I went to work that day, and I didn't tell anybody, and I didn't want to tell anybody because I just wasn't in a place to do so. And instead I had dinner with my stepmom afterwards, and that was lovely. But this year I'm planning on not going to work because I want to observe it. So that's an example of, 1 year you do this and another year you do that.
And it'll change. And I think that, we all want, people, especially with COVID, just want to get back to normal. And the thing is that what was our normal isn't our normal anymore. And that has to do with death and grieving and COVID and a lot of things, is that we're not stagnant beings, that we're always going to change. And even though we were perfectly happy with whatever our normal was, it's gone.
Right. Everything is different now with COVID.
Well, and with Matt's death too, is that there's things that were your normal, and that each year you say, well, this is what I did. This is what I'm going to do now, because you're continuing to change and you're grieving.
Yes. And I still have so much anger over the two things happening at the same time.
Right. Although probably in retrospect at some point you might get to the point where you say, well, the crappy things have happened, and COVID was a crappy thing. I did both crappy things at once, and maybe there's something to that, You might change your mind about that, who knows?
Yeah, pros and cons. We were stuck together, and I love that aspect of the fact that we were together every single day for the most part when he was in his last 16 months of his life. So if I liken it to like he was the best cellmate ever, because he's my best friend. And so I selfishly add him all to myself.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you talking with us this week about going back to work, and for the listeners to, kind of hear your experience and look at their own situation through that lens and see how it fits for them. And it may not, but at least it's another perspective, right?
Absolutely. Grief is unique.
Well, thank you, Claire. We'll talk to you next 2 weeks, right?
We will speak soon.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's podcast. Please listen and stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies. And thank you for listening. Like sand through an hourglass, so is my lost shaker of salt. This is Charlie Navarrete, and from the words of Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and Young, depending what era you're looking at, I'm trying to live the best life I can, and I want to do that until they close the coffin.
Well, I guess he's having a regular kind of burial, huh?
Yep.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, candy can be the bomb. Or, as Charlie would maybe say, candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker.
There we are.
And every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.